This is The Crime Cafe, your podcasting source of great crime, suspense, and thriller writing. I'm your host, Debbi Mack. Before I bring on my guest, I'll just remind you that The Crime Cafe has 2 ebooks for sale, the 9-book box set and the short story anthology. You can find the buy links for both on my website, debbimack.com, DEBBIMACK.com, under the Crime Cafe link. You can also get a free copy of either book if you become a Patreon supporter of the podcast at the $10 monthly level. You'll get that and much more if you support the podcast on Patreon, along with our eternal gratitude for doing so. Today's guest is a lawyer and crime writer, always a good combination. It's a pleasure to introduce the author of Death Sentences, Michael Zimecki. I did pronounce that correctly, didn't
Yes, you did. Yes, thank you.
Good, thank you. And let's see, I'm glad to have you on today. Your novel Death Sentences is fiction, but is based on a true story. Is that correct?
That is, yes. It's based on a shootout that took place in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where I live, in 2009. Between a young man and Pittsburgh police. He was like the character in the novel, unemployed, pretty much of a washout. He'd been in the Marines and was kicked out, had a girlfriend that left him after he abused her, and was living with his mother. And in the historical event that is based on, as in the book, the mother called the cops after the young man's dog crapped on her carpet. He had been, like my character based on him, Peter Popovich, very susceptible to right-wing propaganda. This took place during the Obama administration. He thought Obama was coming to take away his guns. So when the police came to his door, that's what started things off. So the book tracks the actual shootout and event pretty closely, but there are characters in the book that don't appear in the real story. And some of them were drawn from people I know, some of whom I hold dearly, and have tried to fictionalize them so they don't know that they're in here.
Yeah, I was going to say, so you took a true event and you put a lot of fictionalized characters and I assume story developments into it as well.
Absolutely, yes.
But it underscores and brings out a very real problem in our country.
That it does, and it's a problem that continues to plague our country.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to get inside the mind of someone whose political views are quite different from my own, someone who was a neo-Nazi, a white supremacist, a misogynist, an anti-Semite, and trying to make an attempt to understand what attracts an individual like that to those ideologies and those dogmas. So I try to humanize Peter Popovich in my novel. Certainly not a hero. He's a bad man. But I wanted to try to get some insight into how someone goes down that path.
I think that's really a great thing to do these days. I mean, there's so much divisiveness now, and it's so easy to just look at a person like that and just label them as bad and not understand why they ended up where they did. And I get the sense that that's what you're trying to do with this particular novel.
That's correct. That's correct.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I like to step inside the minds of bad characters. I wrote a novella a few years before Death Sentences that's based on the last 5 days in the life of Joseph Stalin, and one doesn't get any more terrible than that.
Mm-hmm.
Did an enormous amount of research. Not sure I actually got the voice right, but I created my version of Stalin. It was probably much more intellectual than the actual Stalin. He wanted to be a writer, I should say, and was a poet in his early life. So it's chilling.
It's interesting. I started reading that and I was drawn right in, actually. So I thought that was a very good job, your
Is it
novella, the way
a
it
little
drew me
bit
right
ahead of
in.
its time? There's a recent novel that takes the same viewpoint that I had in my novella, that Stalin may have been murdered by his compatriots, Khrushchev and company. Uh, when I was writing, it didn't matter to me whether that was true or not. It was just a nice jumping off point.
Mm-hmm. Kind of like the inspiration, as it were.
Yes, yes.
What sort of law do you practice? You still practice law?
I still keep my license active. I was of counsel with my firm up until this year. I'm not doing that anymore. I do mentor a fellow attorney, a young attorney that I know. He does some of the work that I had done when I was practicing. Uh, when I started my career, I did pretty much everything. I worked for a litigation boutique firm. We did defense work. We did plaintiffs' work, commercial litigation, employment discrimination, workers' compensation, other types of administrative law. As my career progressed, it narrowed really into plaintiff's personal injury. And I also started doing veterans disability compensation in the last few years of my career. The young man that I help does a lot of veterans disability work. So it's a way of my keeping my hand in, but I'm not doing trials anymore. I'm not doing hearings. I'm not doing depositions.
But
I'm providing a lot of therapy.
but what you're doing is an important part of legal work, I think, mentoring.
Yes, yes. And
Because certainly when somebody leaves law school, they're not quite ready yet to do everything.
no, they're left out to hang, and law schools really don't do a good job of preparing people to practice law. They do a great job of preparing people to pass the bar exam. And I was fortunate to have some pretty good mentors early on in my career. Uh, my, I clerked for a year and a half with a state court judge, which was valuable experience. And later I worked for a litigator who was the go-to guy, trial guy at the firm that I was working for. Brilliant man. He taught at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Learned a lot from him.
Mm-hmm. I've noticed that lawyers tend to be attracted to the crime fiction writing field. Why do you think that is?
I'm really not sure, and I'm not sure it's actually applicable in my case. But my instincts tend to go to history, and Death Sentences isn't a true historical novel because it's. I think the History Society defines a historical novel as something about events that take place more than 50 years in the past. I tend to be a little bit more interested in contemporary events, but it's the real event that motivates me. Uh, I will say that I've taken a couple of stabs at crime writing. I have two novels in the drawer that are both crime novels. And then I have two other novels that I've worked on that aren't. Although it's hard to find a book that doesn't have some crime, either real or imagined, in it. So it's a genre that can be very, very broadly defined and conceived. As for lawyers, I can't speak for my brethren. I don't know why they go in that direction. And for me, it's I never really practiced criminal law. I think I worked on 3 criminal law cases in the course of a 30-year legal career. One of them was a murder case, but it was a very, very small role that I played doing some research on it, and it's not a case that I've even thought about writing about.
Well, I'll share with you my own theory. I think they tend to be naturally drawn to hard boiled and noir fiction
Mm-hmm.
because they see all the ways that the justice system can not work. And that very naturally lends itself toward that kind of writing.
I think that's true. Yeah, I yeah, and anybody who's practiced law is seen up close and personal the problems with our legal system. So it's
Oh,
certainly
yes.
a motivator.
Yes. Let's see. You mentioned your novella, which, like I said, started off very powerfully, I thought.
Mhm.
Stalin's voice was quite interesting and unique, and it's like, okay, this is Stalin. This is the guy who was so horrible, uh, and yet I'm feeling something in the sense of getting to know him. You know, a kind of not liking him necessarily, but just,
Right.
you know, understanding where he's coming from. Um,
Thank you. Thank you.
but you know, so that's the thing. I think that a lot of people, when they write a villain, they think in terms of stereotypes rather than the human part of why that person is a villain. You know, what motivates that person, what is their need, and so that, you know, that's something that the fact that you can capture that is an excellent thing. Um, I also was interested to see that you write plays, or that you've written at least one play.
Yeah, I've written a couple. I had one
Mm-hmm.
that I had produced as a one act play in Pittsburgh a few years ago, and then turned it into a full length play. Uh, I have won a couple of competitions with it, but and I've workshopped it, but it's really hard to get a play produced in this country right now. You have to be extremely fortunate.
I
Uh,
would think so, yeah. But the fact that you've written one and the subject matter was really interesting too. I mean, I'm interested in history also, and the idea of Oppenheimer as a Soviet spy, that kind of captured me right there. What prompted you to write on that subject, or choose that particular angle?
I think I was. It started with a local interest. There's a Pittsburgh backdrop to the Oppenheimer story. His wife Kitty attended the University of Pittsburgh. She lived in Pittsburgh for a number of years. She met her second husband at a New Year's Eve party in Pittsburgh. A young man named Joe Dallett, who lived in a house in Youngstown with Gus Hall, who later ran for the presidency as a Communist Party candidate. She fell in love with Dallett. He joined the actually it was the Mackenzie the Canadian Brigade, not the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, in the Spanish Civil War, and she was planning on joining him when he was killed overseas in action. She met his friend, a man named Steve Nelson, who for years was head of the Pittsburgh Communist Party, later went to the West Coast. She introduced him at that time to her new husband, J. Robert Oppenheimer. And that backdrop played into the hearing that took place in 1953 when Oppenheimer lost his security clearance. Kitty's relationship with Steve Nelson and her ex-husband, Joe Dallett, played very prominently in that.
Hmm, interesting. Well, I have to ask, since your bio said that you like traveling, swing jazz, fedoras, and hard-boiled fiction,
Okay.
what's your favorite all old film noir movie? You have to have at least one, I figure.
Uh-huh. Oh my, that's tough. Anything with Bogart in. I like the classics. I like The Maltese Falcon. I like Casablanca.
Oh yeah, oh
Uh,
yeah.
anything by Dashiell Hammett that made its way to the screen. Uh, there's some more obscure ones that I'm just not remembering right now, but
Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool.
I like the old black and white classics.
I'm with you there. I'm a film noir fan all the way. Uh,
Some of the more recent stuff, The Usual Suspects, I'm fond of.
Absolutely, yeah. There's some more recent stuff that's excellent. L.A. Confidential.
Oh yeah, yeah. And my taste in music tends to run the same way. I like old swing music, but I like people who are redoing it now and updating it. LaVey Smith and her Red Hot Skillet Lickers in San Francisco is great. She sounds like Billie Holiday. They do their
Mm.
own stuff as well as doing a lot of the standards from the American Songbook. I've grown fond of Postmodern Jukebox, which will take popular songs that people are listening to right now, and jazz them up a little bit. And they've come to Pittsburgh 3 times. I've seen them every time they've been here. They're just a great band to watch in person.
Cool. Excellent. If there's one person you could choose, dead or alive, to have dinner with, who would it be?
Possibly Bertrand Russell. It's the first name that comes to my head. I was a philosophy major, second major, when I was in an undergraduate. And he was someone who wrote very well and was able to translate philosophy into plain English. I think he was an interesting character. His popularity has waned. His reputation was savaged by Roy Monk in a recent biography. But he's still an interesting character and a pacifist, which I am not. But
Interesting in what way?
His philosophy of life, I think I tend to share. He was a man that stood pretty large on the public stage, opposing England's entry into World War I, which was certainly controversial. He got in trouble here in the States when he taught for City College in New York, and actually lost his job. He was one of the leading mathematicians, logicians, and philosophers at the time. So it was actually scandalous from our perspective.
Okay. Well, that's an interesting and unique sort of choice.
And he met a lot of people that I'd like to know a little bit more about. I mean, he had a relationship with Wittgenstein that was interesting. I mean, I'm not sure they ended up being friends at the end of the day. And Wittgenstein is another interesting character. When I was in law school, I attended a informal lunch seminar that 2 of the professors were holding, where we read paragraph by paragraph Wittgenstein's philosophical investigations. So,
my goodness.
I listened. I didn't really contribute much. It was way over my head, believe me.
Well, is there anything else you'd like to add before we finish up?
I'll add one thing on the Wittgenstein thing. I recently picked up a book called Extinction by Thomas Bernhardt, who wrote a book about Wittgenstein and was very much influenced by him. And I was attracted to it by the title. He's an interesting writer, virtually unreadable, in my opinion. It has 2 chapters, 2 parts. Each one is 1 paragraph long, and the type is very small. So I don't recommend it, but.
Oh my gosh. Oh, one other thing. I love the poster you have in the background there. That's really cool.
Oh, yeah. My wife is a Tom Stoppard fan, and actually wrote her doctoral dissertation on Tom Stoppard. She's taken me to every play that we've been able to get to by Stoppard. We saw his Russian trilogy in London a few years ago. We had to watch all 3 plays on the same day. The man that booked us switched our seats from the left side of the stage to the right and to the center, just so we had to get up and move around. We did eat there because there was no time to leave the theater. It was kind of a very immersive experience into Tom Stoppard. It was great.
I guess so, yeah. Well, that's fascinating. But I love that. I love that poster. That is so cool.
I like fedoras. I didn't want to wear one because I'm indoors, but there's one in the poster. That's why it's there.
I wouldn't mind having my own fedora. I think they're really cool hats. So, in any case, it was great to have you on, Michael. Thanks so much. And
with you, Debbie, I really appreciate it.
It was my pleasure too. Let me just add that if you're listening on iTunes, if you would please leave a review there, we'd really appreciate it. It really helps us get the word out about the podcast. And also remember to check out the Crime Cafe box set and short story anthology, as well as the Patreon page on my website at debbimack.com.
Absolutely.
And with that, I will just say keep reading, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.